this full moon is really illuminating this interesting connection between the places of shame and our innate gifts, and helping us to break out of the idea that we have to keep working all the time, be perfect, constantly perform in order to have value in this world. And that by subverting some of these old stories and old places of fear and judgment, and turning them on their heads and challenging them and seeing them in a new light, many of us are going to be invited to connect with these talents and gifts that maybe have been suppressed or pushed to the back burner or feel really overwhelming every time we connect with them, and bring them back to life. And it reminds me of what Carl Jung, the famous psychoanalyst from the early 20th century, said, which was, become who you are afraid to become. And I think that this is really connected to that idea. So let's talk about this amazing Cancer full moon and why I think it's such a powerful place of connection as the first full moon of 2025, and exploring how this can set us up to have a really revolutionary and interesting year ahead. This one is for all my strange, wild, sparkly spirits out there. So for all of us sensitive, sparkly space creatures of the world, and whatever form you like to describe yourself as, please feel free to include that here in this conversation. One of the things we really need is to feel safety and security in order to do anything in life. This is a human need. This is a biological need. And it is a travesty and a tragedy that so many of us have not been able to get that at various points in our life, and that so many now can't get it. And that is definitely there in this conversation. I don't want to belittle that. However, this Cancer full moon is illuminating. If you can find moments of softness, of rest, of safety, prioritize it. And it's really extending the themes we were exploring in the Capricorn new moon we just had right before New Year's. And the Capricorn Cancer axis is all about safety and security. It's how important and essential it is to our world. And the Cancer Capricorn axis is also about parents and inner parenting and care and caregivers and what those look like. So where the Capricorn new moon was helping us to create a really strong foundation of self-respect and care and saying, you matter, this Cancer full moon is following up with the invitation to get really clear about how you want to care for yourself, how you want to actively pursue spaces and moments of softness and security, because guess what? You deserve to have it. And what would happen this year, since this is our first full moon of 2025, what would happen this year if you took that seriously? And I know sometimes the reins aren't always in our hands, and the world doesn't always give us a nice access to rest and restoration and regulation. We know this. But if we took it seriously, if we made it a priority, if we said, I'm going to listen to what helps me feel that sense of safety and softness, and I'm going to try and find moments of it and make it a foundational part of how I care for myself, what would happen? Cancer is tied to the archetype of the mother and the home and the interior and the moon and the intuition and who we are when we're not performing out there in the world, when we're not being expected to be somebody and to fill up the room. So how do we treat ourselves when nobody else is around? How do we treat ourselves when we're alone with ourselves inside of ourselves? And it's just one of those places where it's like, where have we been trying to keep everything going by being perfect, by doing enough work, by making enough, by being worth enough? Where are we still trying to live up to stories people told us about where we haven't gotten enough done or where we needed to prove ourselves? This is a really beautiful moment to challenge those stories and replace them really intentionally with the way we want to create safety, security, and softness within our process. You deserve it. Straight up, period. There is no argument here. And I think sometimes just hearing that, like even saying it right now, just makes me feel a little bit emotional because it's so easy to forget in the day to day. And even when we talk about it all the time here, it might feel like, well, I can't get to that. I have 10 plates that I'm spinning and I do not feel allowed. That has been disallowed to me. And that breaks my heart because you just do. It's an innate human right. And why aren't we starting from that as our foundation? You know, why do we feel like that's the thing we're going to skip? No. This Cancer full moon is calling that out and saying, no, that is not acceptable. There has to be a foundation of this kind of respect for our nervous systems and our bodies, and the fact that we're each going to need our own cauldron of ingredients to reflect who we are and what we need in life. And part of the structure of this particular Cancer full moon is that it is happening during Mars retrograde in Cancer, and Mars retrograde is quite close to this full moon. So they are working together in the sign of the moon, of intuition, of the Great Mother, of our hidden interior worlds, which is very deeply tied to our wild subconscious. So this is really powerful. And this is where I think as we challenge all the places that say you've got to just keep working, you've got to be perfect, you got to make yourself small enough so that you don't embarrass yourself ever. And as we touch into those places of shame about our need for rest, we start to tap into our innate gifts as well. What is right under that initial feeling of embarrassment, worry, and self-analysis? There's something true that actually deserves to be expressed. And this is the question that came up for me when I was thinking about this full moon conjunct Mars retrograde. Mars is so much about reflecting on our motivations. Like, what is motivating us? Is it shame and guilt and fear? For a lot of us, even those of us who don't consider ourselves in that headspace all the time, we might feel like, well, I've got to get the rest of these emails out. Otherwise, my coworkers are going to think I'm not trying hard enough. You know, it's little moments like that. This Mars retrograde in Cancer is really asking us, how are we treating ourselves? How are we treating ourselves? And where do these stories come from? Where do these systems come from that normalize the way we treat and talk to ourselves? And here is the question that came up for me. What does creativity and movement and trying things out in life look like in the world when it's not informed by constant stress, guilt, and fear? What does it look like? Do we feel allowed to access that? Do we feel allowed to model that for ourselves and others? I think this is a really scary and almost taboo topic because there's this whole system going on in the world. It's called systemic shame. It's a powerful thing that is like, you know, if you have dreams and you want to make something beautiful, it's probably not enough and you're not doing enough. And if you just tried a little bit harder, if you were a little bit more perfect, the world wouldn't be such a mess. So what are you doing? And of course, there are people in the world who are living in total fantasy lands where they don't care about anybody else and they're completely selfish and they're screwing everyone over. I mean, that does happen. But if we're basing our lives on those people, it's not a really accurate reflection of how all of this works. So it's just about getting curious about what does creativity and movement and process look like if it was informed by joy, by curiosity, by connection, by reaching a hand out to somebody that we see hurting, by taking a moment and just not finishing the project because it just doesn't really matter. I mean, that's getting really rebellious. I don't know if you're going to want to go all the way there during this full moon. I'm kind of feeling that way at this point. But it's also something that I was thinking about when it comes to Tricia Hersey, one of my favorite, most important thinkers, writers, creators, leaders we have in the world right now. She wrote Rest is Resistance and also We Will Rest. And I talk about her all the time. But she said, release the shame you feel when resting. It does not belong to you. And I think that really comes full circle here with this full moon. What does not belong to you? What shame does not actually belong to you? And when we release that and when we open that, what gifts, talents, insights are waiting there to be expressed by you? That's giving me goosebumps and I'm feeling emotional about it because I'm realizing I'm going to need to sit with that one myself. Sometimes these things come out of my mouth and I'm like, oh, I have some homework to do and it's going to be an interesting ride. I have one more tiny theme that is poking out here during this full moon that I just want to point out really quickly, which is that it's happening right as the nodes of the moon are shifting as well. So we just had 18 months of the North Node in Aries and the South Node in Libra. And now during this full moon, basically, they are shifting into North Node in Pisces, South Node in Virgo. And I have a whole chat about this out if you are curious, and I feel like I barely scratched the surface. But one thing that I think this full moon is ushering into with this next 18-month cycle with the nodes of the moon is a more intuitive approach to life. And what I mean by that is that we can have the best laid plans. We can figure out all the executive functioning tasks that need to happen. And even with the best laid plans, and sometimes even more so with the best laid plans, as we go through the process of living it out and embodying it, we are going to end up needing to adjust and meander and rework many, many times. And many of us have been taught that if we fail to live up to the original plan, that we aren't good enough and we should feel bad about that. One of the big lessons, and this is something I'm just thinking about, and I think this full moon really helps us to maybe set some intentions with, is that it's actually the opposite. If you're living life and it feels like a mess and you're constantly having to readjust and think through and rework the pieces, you're doing it the way it's meant to be done. It was never meant to be the mechanical straight shot, okay? And I find this all the time. I will be like, I'm getting all of this done this week. And guess what? I don't have any spoons one day. None. And even if I try to physically control and force myself to do the thing, it doesn't work out. And I need to work with my tools and skills. I've also been learning this with my dog, who has a very big fear of big sounds. I live in a large city, and we constantly, every single walk we take is a creative meandering to find ways that feel good for him and for me, that we can walk together without it being overwhelming and painful. And it is such a creative task to do. But my point being that we're getting invited into a time where we're living that way, being in responsive communication with our process is where it's at. It's where the creativity is at. This is where the healing of the world is at. This is where the connection points and the creating community and coming up with ideas to help each other in a time when we do not always have the structures that might not always have the best interest at heart for the vulnerable among us, right? So this is a very creative time of caring for each other and being open and just playing around with ingredients. So I just want to invite that in as kind of a behind the scenes theme to keep in mind as we move into these coming months. I am going to be walking us through my little sensitive spirit community over on Patreon. We're going to be walking through a visualization that's about breaking the spell of shame that's shut us down from feeling safe to explore and be with ourselves and access our gifts. It's such a fun, helpful, oh my gosh, so healing visualization. It's really soft and gentle, a fantastic landing point here in the early part of the year. I'd love to offer that up to you. And we also have all of the wild dreaming practices out now in that space, or nearly all of them. So you can also join us for that. Wild dreaming is something I created because I just kind of work in a non-linear way. And I like to think about my practice and my process in such a wild, fun way that allows me to feel hopeful and curious about myself and the world. So I'd highly recommend joining me over there if you would like some support. I am shuffling away here. This moon is just bringing up so much. Wheel of Fortune. And isn't that just so fitting right now? The wheel is turning and we can feel that. We're like shifting into a different season. And with that, we're going to need different skills. and different ways of moving than maybe we've used historically, maybe we've used generationally, maybe we've used in the old work systems that really aren't working for any of us anymore. I think all of those questions are there. And a theme with Mars retrograde in Cancer that's coming up right now is about also the turning of the wheel when it comes to generational hurt and pain, and how that's shifting, and how it's time to maybe live and embody some different things for our ancestors as well as ourselves. Card and the Sun. Let's leave it with these two because, wow, major arcana, you can see this is a really impactful, emotionally powerful full moon. And like I said, I'm a little intimidated because as I've been talking here today, y'all, I can sense I'm going to be feeling some things, but these two are so great. The 10 and the 19 in the major arcana. So like I said, a change of season, a change of pace. I think just kind of thinking about, ooh, yes, this is going to be a season of intuition and responsiveness to my body, to my surroundings, to my ingredients, and allowing those to transmute and shift and change. The power structures that be as they are going to turn, and there will be new life and new ideas. And I think just remembering that there's always evolution and change, there's always the next vision, allowing that to land, just like working with that. What is the next vision? What is coming up for you creatively, imaginatively? What happens when we think from that place of freedom and peace rather than the guilt and the shame? It's so fascinating, and that's part of how the wheel is turning. And the Sun is giving us that message. The Sun is about the theme of enlightenment through play and joy and laughter. That feels almost taboo to say. I think I'm a pretty justice-oriented person. If you haven't picked up on that, like, now is a good time. Now is a good time to realize that I give a crap about the vulnerable among us and mental health issues and all the weirdos of the world. These are my people and I care. Just putting that out there. But so it feels a little taboo sometimes with the problems going on, but I will say a good round of laughter can help me find my center and show up in a way almost nothing else can. And it empowers me to be embodied. Gloria Steinem once said that one of the only things that can't be forced from a person is laughter. And I love that. It's a sign of freedom, of free will, of breaking out of old patterns and reclaiming ourselves and our gifts. And laughter, I think, in the face of shame and embarrassment and guilt and stress is maybe one of the greatest antidotes to all of those systemic expectations we've been having to live with this whole time. So for me, this all just makes sense. And I'm sure many of you are also getting so many intuitive ideas as you see those cards. Like, what a clear message to begin this year with these energies at play. Wow. So like I said, I'm going to be walking us through a really gentle visualization to break the spell that many of us have felt cast over ourselves throughout our lives with shame, with guilt, with stress, to awaken from it. And of course, that's an ongoing thing. It's not like we're going to do this visualization, you're going to be like, done. But it does help lift some of the fog that it can put over our minds and ourselves, and just help us get into kind of a curious place again. And it's a really soft landing place that I love this practice and ritual. Like I said, we're also doing all of that wild dreaming in that space. It's so amazing. It's really my passion project right now, to create and play with you all. So I'd love to see you there. I love it when you're here. How are you feeling? How is this new moon feeling? I want to know where you're at with everything. And I'm sending you all so much love as we move through this time. And I'll see you back here so very soon. We have a lot coming up in the coming weeks. And you know, I'm going to be right here to chat through them. So I hope you stick around. Let me know in the comments how you're doing. And we'll talk again very, very soon.